Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just broke down some of the questions that I have going into this week. I think it's a huge week for quarterbacks. It's also a huge week for coaching narratives where a lot of fans are going to make some very aggressive opinions at the end of this weekend, one way or the other, for their coaches. So, going to be fascinating to watch that. But let's get into some hot takes I have going into this week. There are a couple of games that I think might just be a little bit overlooked. I think we're going to learn a lot about what Colorado is this upcoming weekend. But let's start with that game tonight. Arizona State going over to Texas State to play a very, very fun one. I know these two teams don't necessarily jump off the page when you see them. These is going to be a very, very fun game. When a line is 1.5 ASU and the over-under is 59.5, you're going to have a lot of fun. There's going to be plenty of points scored in this one, and there's going to be plenty of back and forth. Frankly, this might be the most fun game of the entire weekend. So you're going to want to tune in at 7:30 Eastern to make sure you get this one in. And I think it's one of those games where you have a guy coming in for Jordan McLeod on the other side that is just so dangerous. He's one of those guys that it doesn't matter who he's on the football field with. He thinks he can compete with you. He thinks he can absolutely go punch for punch with you. And frankly, he probably can with a lot of these teams that he's going to face off against this year. And then on the other side, you have Scadaboo, who's just doing ridiculous stuff all over the field. Anytime that those two guys step on the field, you're going to want to be tuned in, just plain and simple. This is a very interesting Arizona State team that is playing better football around this time of year than I thought they would. I thought they would be a team that kind of develops into what they were going to be, but they came out of the gate screaming, and I think it's one of those things where, although the Mississippi State game isn't outright crazy that they won that game, but still a very impressive performance, and still an SEC team coming to your house and being able to handle business is a big deal and sets them up for a lot of success in the Big 12, but it could come to an end in San Marcos this upcoming or tonight if they do not have their P's and Q's about them, because there are a lot of talented players on that Texas State offense, including Jordan McLeod. Chris Don Jr. had an incredible game last week, and he's one of those guys that they're going to feed the ball to him. There's no two ways about that. Arizona State, if you're going to beat them, you're going to have to get those big-time plays, and that's likely going to be the way that you do that, is getting the ball to Chris Don Jr. And then Arizona State, it's all about the run game. They're going to try to batter them. They're going to try to beat them into submission, and they might just be successful in that with all of the running backs that they have to throw out there. But overall, I think this is one of those games that you might just be overlooking just a little bit tonight. It's worth turning this on, no doubt about it, along with the Thursday night matchup. I'm not necessarily saying take away from that by any means, but if you're only a college football guy, not so much an NFL guy, this is the one you're going to want to tune into. I can promise you that. I think Jalen Milroe is going to be the story of the weekend. He's going up to Madison, Wisconsin, where it's kind of a funny spot. I think Alabama is comfortably the better team in this game. I think they have the better players pretty much across the board at every single position. I also think it's a big enough game to where a lot of people are going to be watching. A lot of people are going to be tuned into this one and seeing what this team can do. And frankly, I think this offense has not quite found itself. And I know that sounds crazy with some of the different plays that have been made over the last couple of weeks and all of the different incredible down the field passes, but the reality is Jalen Milroe has a certain skill set. He's going to be able to run the ball. He throws a very pretty deep ball. Everything else is very questionable at the very least. And I think Kalen DeBoer is still kind of figuring that out. I think he's still kind of figuring out that with this O-line that is still kind of finding itself, you're likely going to need Jalen Milroe's legs in this offense if you're going to be successful on the ground. And I think he's figuring out that if he's going to be able to utilize Jalen Milroe's throwing ability, the run game has to get going, and you have to utilize this guy in different ways and make it more difficult for this defense to know what's coming, because then that's when that guy's dangerous. That's when that guy is able to open up things in the pass game, is when they have to worry about him running the ball. So I expect him to see a lot more of Jalen Milroe out on the outside making plays with his legs, and that's when he's dangerous. I think he's going to put up just ridiculous numbers this upcoming weekend, and I think when we walk out of this weekend, he is going to be one of the names that we're talking about around the Heisman. Now, how long that lasts with Georgia coming to town in a couple of weeks is a question, but as of right now, I expect him to be the outright story of the weekend. Another thing that I think we'll learn a ton about Colorado this upcoming weekend. I think we're going to learn really who this program is top to bottom in a lot of different ways. They're coming off a game where they just got punched in the mouth. There's no two ways about that. And this week has become one of the biggest weeks for Deion since he's shown up at Colorado. And I know that sounds a little bit crazy, but the reality is you just got punched in the mouth on the road. You have so much of this outside noise, some of it fair, some of it not remotely fair. But the reality is you're walking into this game where a Colorado State team really wants to beat you. We saw some comments from Torrey Horton and Braden Fowler-Nicolosi going into this game. They want to beat you bad. They very, very much want to beat you, and you're going to their place to play this game. It is going to take a toughness. It is going to take a grit. It is going to take a culture that we just haven't quite seen from Colorado thus far throughout the season. Doesn't mean that they don't have it. Doesn't mean that they can't dig deep, but they're really going to have to in this game. And especially with Shiloh Sanders not playing in this game, they're going to need some help from that back end of that defense. So it's one of those things that we've heard all of the noise for the past week. We heard about Shedeur Sanders leaving the field early, although I think that was mostly injury related. We heard about him throwing his offensive lineman under the bus. I didn't necessarily love that. I don't necessarily think he was wrong, but I also don't think you say that in a press conference because then your O-line is a little bit more disenthused than they already were. So I don't necessarily love the way he handled that, but he did clarify his comments, kind of handled it very nicely. So not necessarily going to hold anything against him there, but the reality is there's so much noise around this program right now because the reality is everyone's waiting for you to lose that game. There is no a world where you don't have a lot of people around Colorado that are waiting for you to fail. That's just the reality of what Deion has built over there, and it's the reality they're going to have to live with. And if they fall this week, there's going to be a lot of people burying that program. There's going to be a lot of people saying that Deion is going to jump ship at the end of the year. There's going to be a lot of talk that they do not have to deal with. So we're going to learn a lot. We're going to learn how tough this team is. We're going to learn how much culture this team has, and we're going to learn if they can refocus after just getting absolutely railroaded a week ago against Nebraska. So very interesting performance for Shedeur and for this entire program, and when we come out of it, we're going to have some very interesting opinions around Colorado, I feel like. But the other guy that I think is going to be a huge talking point this weekend is Avery Johnson. I think he starts his Heisman campaign tomorrow night against Kansas State. Or against Arizona, not against Kansas State. I like this Arizona team. I think they are very dynamic on the offensive side of the ball. The thing is, they struggle to keep running quarterbacks at bay. And Devin Dampier had over 100 yards rushing in week 1 against them. And KSU just needs to unlock Avery Johnson's legs. He has not been utilized that way at all this season thus far, and they're not going to be able to run the ball the way that they need to in Big 12 play if he is not a part of that offense. So you got to get this guy going. You got to get him out there on the edge and making plays, and if they do, I think he's going to put up just an incredible performance in this game. So I think Avery Johnson's one of those guys that he was coming into the season with all this hype around his running ability and what he can do on the ground. Haven't necessarily seen it yet. And I think, frankly, when everyone does see it on full display tomorrow night, I think they're going to really buy into this guy in a hurry. I think he's one of those guys that a lot of people want to buy in on Heisman, and I think he's going to give you a really good reason to on Friday night. Very talented player, and I think once they start utilizing his legs just a little bit more, he's one of the most dangerous players in the entire country. I think multiple group of 5 teams are going to knock off Power 4 teams this weekend. We talked about this earlier on where I don't know why so many teams are going away from their home to play these games, including the game tonight. Arizona State going to San Marcos to play Texas State. Outright ridiculous. You are just asking for a disaster to happen, but there's so many different opportunities for this to happen. Texas State is obviously one that I'm watching very closely with that line only being 1.5 in Arizona State's direction, but Vandy's going to Georgia State, which is a really solid Georgia State team. Not perfect by any means, and Vandy should win that game, but Vandy's been rolling very smoothly right now. Maybe Georgia State can throw a rock into the way. And then Utah, without Cam Rising, is heading up to Utah State. Maybe that one gets a little bit more interesting than we think. And then obviously BYU at Wyoming is a very fascinating one. We saw Wyoming take care of business against Texas Tech last year at Wyoming, and maybe the same thing happens this time around. So we have so many different moments. Tulsa, Oklahoma State is another great moment for a possible upset, but the reality is there is just too many spots for me this upcoming weekend that I can't pick this. There are so many guys. There are so many teams that can make some noise from the group of 5 level. I think there are a couple on here, Texas State and Miami of Ohio over Cincy, that wouldn't even be all that crazy. They would be pretty relatively normal matchups that, yes, the underdog won, but not that much of an underdog in either of those games. So I feel pretty good about this one. Maybe it's not quite as hot as I want it to be, but I do think the group of 5 continues to make a really good statement about maybe they deserve one of those buys when you get around to college football playoff time. Obviously needs a lot of more things to fall into place, but getting these big time wins early could make all the difference. And then I think Oregon sends a message this weekend. We talked about it earlier. I made my pick, and I'm picking them by a ton over over Oregon State. But the reality is, they know they need to flip the switch. The first 2 weeks were nowhere near where they need to be on the O-line, but just from an effort perspective, they were nowhere near where they need to be when they get into Big 12 play. And I think it was a little bit of just looking forward. It was a little bit of them getting caught up in, we have the Big 10 coming up, and we have to be ready for those games, and we have to make sure that we can hold our own, that we're not going to exhaust ourselves through 2 weeks. And it's not to say that they didn't, work really hard in those games, because especially that Boise State game, they had to down the stretch. But the reality is, I think they're keeping a lot in. I think they're holding a lot back in. I think they got to unleash it this weekend. Not necessarily because they need it to beat Oregon State, but I do think they need it to just prove everyone that they are still that team, to prove everyone that they are a national title contender. And if they don't do it this week, then there are a lot of people that would just outright write off Oregon going into Big Ten play. So it's one of those things that Dan Lanning knows what this is about. He knows that his team has not played remotely good enough football, and he knows that people are asking a million different questions about them in the media and all around them. They need to show that they are still that team. They need to show that they are a team that can outright dominate someone on the other side of the field, and they're going to have enough of a spotlight to get it done because of this game being that old matchup that we all miss so much. There's going to be plenty of people watching, including myself, and I better see Oregon come out there with their hair on fire, because if they don't, if they come out sluggish once again through 3 weeks, I'm no longer asking a question of, can Oregon compete in the Big Ten? I'm asking the question of, can Oregon even beat the teams that they're expecting to beat this upcoming year? Can they beat the Michigan States that are going to come out there with their hair on fire, are going to come out there being fully ready to go and wanting to make a statement against a team that, as of through 2 weeks, just looks a little bit disenthused and looks like they're not giving the effort that they need to down the stretch of the season, or they're going to be in just so much trouble. I like this Oregon team. I still think they're very capable, and I do think they will make the statement this upcoming weekend. But if they don't, there is a lot of very interesting conversations going on around Eugene. But overall, I think there's so many different things to talk about as we head into week 3. Tomorrow is going to be a little bit of a different show with all the different stuff happening around the sport right about now, with realignment kind of rearing its ugly head right about now. But we'll get into all of that tomorrow, so definitely check that out. But that'll do it for this edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. Your support means a lot to us, so please remember to subscribe to the show, leave a positive review. It does make a huge difference for us. Also, follow us on Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, all the social pages for all the content and updates you could possibly need. We have really incredible people doing awesome work across every single sport you could want. So anything in the world of sports that you need, come on over to GSMC and we have you totally covered. But thank you once again for listening, and I will see you guys tomorrow.